resort for our mothers and youth, particularly in rural areas and slums. Without offering any services to the chairmas, women groups and trade associations, Ruto has decided they must pay taxes. This strikes at the heart of women's economy. It kills savings and spreads poverty among an already vulnerable group. At a time, the National Hospital Insurance Fund and the National Social Security Fund are failing. Ruto is telling Kenyans to forego 3% of their salaries and deposit it into some fantasy called housing levy. Nobody knows where it is housed. The government cannot agree whether it is a tax or an investment. Nobody knows how government became an investment advisor to Kenyans. They ignore concerns by employers and employees that many pay lip services, that many pay slips are already overwhelmed by deductions, loans, and lack of pay rise. They ignore concerns that this tax will increase business operating costs and force farms to relocate. Already some farms are relocating merely because of the high cost of energy in this country. It is cheaper to manufacture in Egypt and export back to Kenya. Look at the arrogance with which they want to raise turnover tax for businesses from the current 1% to 3%. They are targeting small businesses by reducing turnover of taxable businesses from Kenya shillings 1 million to 500,000. With this, any small business that sells goods and services worth 1,370 daily will pay a turnover tax of 15,000 per year, regardless of whether the business makes a profit or not. That sounds like a memo on how to kill businesses and the economy. Nobody now knows where the bottom-up economy went. The mama mboga, the boda boda, the juakali, the hustlers. Contrast that decision to increase taxes for small businesses and merry-go-rounds with Ruto's plan to scrap VAT on aircrafts and helicopters. A benefit that should be extended to small businesses is being extended to the rich who trade aircrafts. This is not bottom-up, this is top-bottom. Ruto promised to respect every job and its contribution to the economy. This does not look like respect for every job. The bill exposes a clear disconnect between Ruto's fantasy and the experiences of ordinary people. Hard-working people, like youth seeking to make a living as content creators and social media influencers for fun, fame, and money, are being slapped with a punitive 15% withholding tax. Ruto wants to impose a 316% tax hike on beauty products such as wigs, false beards, eyelashes, human hair, and artificial nails, among others. The beauty industry is a major employer, particularly of our women and girls who have been unable to find work elsewhere. Millions of young men and women eke a living out of saloons, spas, and barber shops. Those businesses face closure. Others will have to sack employees. Ruto and Kenya Kwanza are behaving as if cost of living is no longer a crisis in this country. Despite existing high prices, Ruto wants to impose 16% VAT on maize flour, cassava flour, and wheat flour. It gets worse when we factor in the proposal to expose agricultural pest control products, transportation of sugarcane, raw materials for fertilizer manufacturing, and fertilizers to VAT. The net effect is that costs rise again. From his fantasy world, Ruto wants to double the VAT on fuel from 8% to 16%. Palm prices will increase by 9 shillings per litre of diesel and 10 shillings per litre of petrol. The cost of goods, bus fare, and production will immediately rise again. Healthcare has impoverished millions of Kenyans. But Ruto wants to expose pharmaceuticals and medicaments to taxation by removing them from the zero-rated to tax-exempt list, targeted at the price of lifelong medication like insulin and those for chronic illnesses like diabetes and hypertension. After raising the cost of fuel, they want to raise advance tax on motor vehicles. Advance tax on passenger vehicles will increase from the current Kenya shillings 2,400 to at least Kenya shillings 5,000, and from 3,000 to at least 5,000 for commercial vehicles. Trucks will now pay at least 60,000 shillings annually, up from 20,000 shillings. Obviously, the cost will be passed to the consumer, making matatu and taxi transportation more unaffordable. And who unto you, if that vehicle ends up in an accident, Ruto wants to treat insurance compensation as income and introduce a 16% VAT on it. Insurance compensation will no longer be seen as compensation of what was lost. My car had an accident. The insurance company sends an assessor, assesses the extent of damage, which most of the times is under assessment. I'm paid compensation to go and repair my car. I have to pay a tax on that compensation. This I don't know what kind of arithmetic it is. It is the same story with per diems, mileage and travel allowance of public officers. Per diem will now be treated as an income and attract a 30% income tax. I used to be a civil servant, and per diems are based on the costs of living in the country you're traveling to. That's why it differed from Tokyo, Oslo, New York, Accra, Cairo, and so on. And whatever you did not use, you are required to retire on return. Now it is an income that you must pay 30% on. You could go on, and it will be tax after tax. Looking at the proposals, one cannot help asking, what planet does Ruto live on? Does he understand what Kenyans are going through? Let me turn briefly to the question of how did we find ourselves here? The official lie is that Kenya Kwanza inherited a broke country. The truth is, the cash crunch has been caused by economic mismanagement, wasteful spending, corruption, and the hiring of incompetent personnel. This worsening economic situation has been manufactured in State House and the office of the President in the last 8 or so months. Government's own data indicates that contrary to what Ruto promised and what he is saying, borrowing has gone up instead of coming down. But strangely, the cash crunch continues. In September 2022, when Uhuru Kenyatta officially handed over to Ruto, Kenya's total debt was 8.701 trillion. I repeat, 8.701 trillion. Of this, 4.33 trillion was external debt, while 4.366 was domestic debt. As at March 2023, to 4.539 in March 2023. We can go further back to the year 2021. Between September 2021 to March 2022, that a comparable period, our debt rose by 405 billion, from 7.96 trillion to 8.401 trillion. External debt was at 4.209 trillion, while domestic debt stood at 4.192 trillion. This was the time Kenya was struggling with the impacts of COVID-19, including implementation of subsidies and the emerging war in Ukraine. But our total debt was still lower than what Ruto has incurred in 6 months' time. Kenya Kwanza has borrowed more than any other regime. They have removed subsidies, raised taxes, but the cash crunch has continued. They cannot pay salaries. They cannot disburse money to schools. They cannot disburse money to counties. They cannot disburse money to the elderly. They cannot finance the National Hospital Insurance Fund. And nearly all major infrastructure projects have stalled. Where is the money going? It is being stolen and being spent on wrong priorities to massage Ruto's ego. And that is not all. Quietly, Ruto is trying to change the country's debt ceiling from the current absolute number of Kenya shilling 10 trillion to a moving number of 55% of GDP. And right now they are trying to bring an amendment in Parliament that will remove the parliamentary authority to sanction increase of debt. The debt level is already 60% of the GDP. To beat that violation of the law, Ruto wants to force an amendment to the Public Finance Act to allow the National Treasury and not Parliament to set new debt ceiling, which is why we are calling on Kenyans to reject excess taxation to finance wasteful expenditure. It is urgent that we bring Ruto back to earth because he lives on another planet. As this bill heads to the National Assembly, we must remind Ruto that excessive taxation is stifling growth. We must tell Ruto that when people have to park cars at home because of cost of fuel, it is bad for the economy. We must tell him that when Kenyans postpone traveling up country because they can't afford fuel or fare, it is bad for the economy. We must tell him that when people choose to stay indoors because they want to spend less on expensive goods, it is bad for the economy. And you must tell him that these things are happening now, here in this country. Rather than burden Kenyans, we want Ruto to undertake the following. 1. Stop duplication of county roles and responsibilities. In the proposed bill, budget for health is growing by 35 billion shillings at the national level, yet health is a devolved function. 2. Adopt a zero-based budgeting. Don't take the previous budget as the baseline. Every budget must start at ground zero, where everything has to be justified. 3. Don't grow the size of the budget. Cut it down and live within your means. 4. Instead of imposing new taxes, see the loopholes that lead to the loss of revenue. 5. Stop non-essential government expenditures, including the appointment of the chief administrative secretaries. 6. Reduce the size of government. 7. Cut non-essential domestic and international travel. 8. Freeze ministerial out-of-station allowances, ministerial house allowances, and domestic allowances for cabinet and principal secretaries. 9. Stop corruption and theft of public funds. 10. Finally, we ask Ruto to humble himself, withdraw this bill, offer apology, and seek forgiveness from Kenyans for the anxiety caused then, and begin afresh. One point I wanted to mention, that the budget for the parliament is 41 billion shillings. That of the judiciary is 23 billion shillings. But the budget for housing, which is talking about as his flagship project, is 29 billion. Parliament, with only 400 or so many members, it allocated 43 billion shillings for members to be globe-trotting around. Yet housing, which is saying is fundamental to his budget, is only allocating 29 billion shillings, less than what is given to members of parliament, almost equal to what is given to the judiciary. Is economics upside down. You have noted that the regime has run out of sound bites and explanations for these proposals and has resorted to threats. But we have agreed with our MPs on what to do. Vote against any tax rises. Should Ruto overrun the National Assembly, we will regroup and overrun him in the wider National Assembly of the whole people of Kenya. End of statement. So we welcome Madam Martha Karua, who just joined. I would now like to invite the chair of the Mio Council, Honorable Deritu Murithi, to take over from here. Welcome.
Yep. Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency Raila Odinga, Your Excellency Martha Karua, party leaders, honorable members of Parliament for the state, ladies and gentlemen. But I think we should have applauded the Honorable Odinga for a fantastic speech. Thank you. So my colleagues and I will simply point you to, if you will, specific clauses, because the Honorable Raila Odinga has already given to you the broad strokes and highlights of what is going on. So we'll just go into it, and we'll share the presentation with my colleagues. And at the very end, there will be an opportunity for members of the Fourth Estate to ask questions. Now, well, look, I know some other commentators will say, how do you finance, development that you do have to tax? It is true. I mean, budget is an expenditure, and then you finance it through taxation measures and through borrowing. The difficulty, of course, is that if you tax your economy beyond what is practical, then actually it collapses. If you borrow beyond what your means or what you should borrow, your economy similarly collapses. So we'll just take you clause by clause on what these taxation measures are, and explain briefly what the impact of each is. As you've all know, the bill is or looks at 5 broad areas: income tax, withholding tax, value-added tax, excise duties, and miscellaneous fees and levies. Now, it's important to remember that income tax is supposed to be a tax on income, and we'll come back to this point briefly. So let me start with turnover tax. So clauses 9, clause 24B propose to increase turnover tax from 1 to 3%, and also bring down the threshold from which you start to pay. And the threshold comes down to 1,370 shillings. Basically, if you have a kiosk around the corner selling tea and mandazi, if you sell 1,370 shillings per day, then you pay 3% of that. You can also think about it. I know many of people in the city take a taxi, like Uber or Bolt or Riddle or whatever. this is 2 taxi rides. If you take a taxi from here to there for 500 shillings on his return or her return journey, then she'll probably already begin to pay tax. The point about turnover tax is that you are taxing the top line. You are taxing somebody whether they make a profit or not. And really, we should be looking at taxing income, not overall revenue. Clause 5 of the bill proposes to tax employee share ownership programs. If you have a small business and you want your staff to get committed to the business and you offer them some few shares, and this is a common practice with Kenyan small businesses, so that they are motivated to work even harder. Now, this will attract 30% because it's considered part of your compensation. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that dividends are already themselves taxed in addition to capital gains. So this will end up being a triple taxation. And you will see in the bill that the valuation, determining what is the value of these shares that this small business has provided to the employees, is up. The determination is up to the commissioner, which therefore leaves room for abuse. The bill also proposes to tax at clause 24 to increase the rate of tax from 30 to 35% for those who earn 500,000 or more, so-called high earners. In most jurisdictions in the world, corporation tax is either higher or at the same level as personal tax. So it's not in many places where you will find that the employee is taxed at a higher level than the organization that they work for. But this is what is proposed at clause 24, moving from 30 to 35%. Clause 5 targets per diems for public officers. So per diems, travel allowance, mileage will now be taxed at 30%. Now, what we want to point out here, per diem is not an income. You pay or you provide it to an employee so that they might go to Mombasa or to Kisumu or Nyandarua or Machakos for work. So you cannot treat it as though it's an income and then tax it. We are quite certain this is going to affect motivation and morale and disadvantages public sector workers a great deal. I want to talk briefly about withholding tax. Now, the current level of withholding tax for professionals, if you are an architect, an engineer, a consultant in economics and so on, is 5%. So that when, as a professional, when you work for an organization or an individual and they are paying you, they withhold 5% and remit it to the tax authorities. The proposal is to tax content creators at 15%, and you will see this in clause 2 of the bill. Now, this is, of course, quite discriminatory. Now, and you have to remember who are content creators. They are most likely young people using ICT, and the proposal is to tax them or to withhold at 15% as compared to 5% for everybody else. So it's quite discriminative, and we think it's going to discourage instead of encouraging the digital economy, and obviously has a negative impact on young people. Clause 10 and Clause 24 propose to tax digital assets. Digital assets, cryptocurrency or non-fungible tokens. But let's talk about cryptocurrency like bitcoins. And the way you can think about it is the same way you think about dollars or euros. You have businesses that are called forex bureaus that buy and trade currency. You don't tax them or for the volume that they have sold. Instead, you check whether they have made a profit and you tax the profit. What is being proposed at Clause 10 is to tax the bitcoins at 3%. So you are taxing the person whether they have made a loss or not, which we should not be doing. I think, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I suspect some people, yourselves here for the state in communications, perhaps you moonlight in DJing services and so on. So you will not escape if this bill passes. Clause 24 proposes to tax promotional services at 5%. So, for instance, if you went to an event like this and you are, providing the service of being the master of ceremony, and then you're paid some little token, then that token is going to be charged at 5% withholding tax, and you will find this at Clause 24 of this bill. The advance tax at Clause 24, and the proposal, of course, is to increase this advance tax on saloon vehicles, on buses and minivans and trucks and so on. And the Prime Minister has walked you through this. The impact, of course, is what we are explaining. If this proposal passes, a normal truck will now be paying 60,000 instead of 20,000, and this obviously is going to affect all goods because all goods are based on transportation services. Reflect on again the people who do who offer taxi rides on various ride-hailing services. Those vehicles that are then used for this purpose they will be now paying 5,000, which is about double what they are paying now. And I want to encourage my colleague, the Honorable Bandi, to come up and help me with the balance of this presentation. And as I said at the end of the presentation, we will welcome Q&A. Now, Clause 17 redefines, please come. Clause 17 redefines entities, including social welfare organizations, chamas, clubs, and so on. And what the clause is trying to say is anything you get beyond subscriptions will be considered business income. So now in your and as the Prime Minister has explained, around the country, in every village, women, men, young people organize themselves in chamas and merry-go-rounds. And the effect of this clause is to consider whatever proceeds they receive as income. Anything above subscription, and therefore subject to taxation at the normal 30%, which is the rate of income tax. You can see that this is obviously going to discourage savings amongst women, amongst youth groups, amongst anybody really who is in this circumstance. The last one, so that I invite Honorable Badi, is capital gains tax. Clause 26 proposes to introduce, in fact, not enhance, capital gains tax based on property if you put that property in a business. So when two partners get together and they start a business and you put your assets into that business, obviously the balance sheet of that business goes up. The value inside that business goes up. And the proposal at clause 26 is to tax it, to tax that incremental. I can see Professor Naituli is looking at me. Let me re-explain. What I'm saying, Professor, is like this. If Professor and Mheshimiwa Wajakoya decide to start a business and you each put an asset in that business, obviously the balance sheet of that new business goes up by the value of the assets you've put in there. The proposal is that if that value is more than 20%, it should be taxed, which I can see the Honorable Kioni is looking at me. These are not my proposals, Honorable Kioni. This is what is contained in the finance bill at clause 26. So do not throw your cap at Badi and I. It is a bit outlandish. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to invite my colleague, Honorable Bandi. Please proceed. You'll use that one.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. At times, I know when people start engaging on issues, finances, sometimes we find it boring. I'll try to make it a little bit more interesting. What actually Honorable Nderitu was saying on capital gains tax is, if today, Honorable Kioni, together with your wife, you enter into a partnership and you're running your partnership and you decide that you want to give some of your assets, including your house or building, for that business, then of course the total balance sheet of the business will go up. And if that increase is more than 20%, the Ruto government is telling us that that must now be taxed. So that is a simple explanation of that. But I want to now focus more on VAT. Kenyans have just been talking about one aspect or one particular amendment to the VAT Act, and that is the amendment that is touching on fuel and petroleum products, which is found under clause 28. Yes, the proposal is to increase that from the current 8% to 16%, something that we defeated a few months ago. And now, if that happens, obviously, then the cost of transportation in this country will be high, whether it is individual transportation or private transportation or transportation of produce, agricultural produce to the market. It will increase. That will definitely increase the cost of basic commodities. It will also affect the cost of construction, and that is where we find disconnects between Ruto's policies. In one way or the other, they are talking of affordable housing. In another, they are taking away that by making the cost of construction very expensive, because there will be transportation of materials to the various construction sites. But that is not the end. If you go to clause 30 of the bill, clause 30 of the bill is the one that the Prime Minister talked about, the insurance compensation. Yesterday, I watched my colleagues struggling to mislead Kenyans, the chair of the Finance Committee, trying to say that this one is only touching on those supplies where input VAT had been paid, and now there is an accident, maybe fire has burnt the business, and so you are being compensated, and so you could claim input tax twice. Interestingly, I want us to engage our minds to this. First, this MP was trying to think the law, but not what is in this bill. What he was saying is thinking the law. The truth is, for you to be refunded input tax in this country, you must have sold the commodity. So before it is sold, you cannot be refunded input tax. So something that is burnt has not been sold. And there is no insurance company which will compensate you at the selling price. They will compensate you at the cost at which you acquired the commodity. So what he was telling us was simply playing with our psychology. What is provided in this bill is that if you get compensation, that compensation will be taxed at 16%. That is the truth. And that no one can run away from that. I want to go straight to clause 33, which is proposing a number of amendments. And I will start, interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, Ruto has been telling Kenyans that why don't you praise me for the 20 items that have now exempted. But most of those items that he's talking about were actually zero rated. Presently they are zero rated. Now they are being moved from zero rating to exempt. And you are telling us we should clap for you. Unless these people have not really fully briefed President Ruto, I think he has not been properly briefed. For those who may not know, or those who don't understand the difference between exempt and zero rating, the simple explanation I would give you is that exempt commodities zero rated commodities are cheaper because you are allowed to claim input tax. In exempt, you cannot charge VAT, but any VAT that you paid on what went into adding value to that commodity is claimable. In exempt, it is not. I want to give a very simple example. The table in front of you. If that table is exempt from tax, VAT, what it means is if you are selling the table, you will not charge VAT. But any VAT that you paid on wood or timber that was used to make the table, nails, glue, all that is still subject to VAT. You will not claim that tax. But if it is zero rated, apart from charging zero tax when you are selling the table, you will be allowed to claim any tax that you paid for the nails, for the wood, for the glue, and anything that went into the manufacture of the table. Therefore, what I'm saying in a nutshell is a zero-rated commodity is cheaper than an exempt commodity. What Ruto is doing is transferring many of those items from zero rating to exempt. And you can find that under clause 33. You read it together with the original act. That is a problem that I find with the Kenya Kwanza leadership. They are reading the act without the bill without the act. So if they are told that pharmaceuticals, for example, are now exempt, they celebrate, they start clapping, not knowing that pharmaceutical products are currently zero rated. And I will mention now what some of those items. One is the maize flour, another is the cassava flour, wheat flour. And we are asking, what is the problem with Kenya Kwanza with unga? They just want to make unga expensive to this country. Are they discouraging us from eating ugali? Or they should tell us. If they don't want us to eat ugali, they should say so. The other item that was initially zero rated, now is going to be exempt, is under clause 33, pharmaceutical products, more particularly insulin. I think the Prime Minister talked about it. Now treating diabetes will be more expensive. Hypertension, and many of us, and the stress that we are going through as a nation, a higher percentage will go through hypertension than experienced previously. Now is the time to make treatment of hypertension should even be more cheaper. The agricultural sector, fertilizer, and I was in a studio this morning with the deputy leader of majority, and he was saying that agricultural products like fertilizer are going to be cheaper because the fertilizer and the fertilizer manufacturing raw materials will now be exempt. I was telling him, you are just showing your ignorance to the people of Kenya. Do you know presently it is zero rated? And now you are taking it to exempt. And you want to cheat Kenyans out there that you are making the cost of agricultural product, agricultural sector, the input for farming, cheaper. You are subsidizing fertilizer, but you are making it more expensive. Construction of materials for tourism sector and recreational facilities are now going to be vatable. They are not presently. Eco-friendly cooking gas is now going to be vatable. Construction of specialized hospitals. In fact, I met a bishop as I was walking out of the studio. He was going to talk about cancer, and he asked me, what should I say? I said, you go and tell Kenyans that we are suffering as a nation. We can't treat cancer because we don't have specialized hospitals. If we get investors who are ready to invest in specialized hospitals to treat cancer and such ailments, presently the materials they use in construction of the hospital facilities would be zero rated. What Ruto is telling you, that must stop, because we don't need to again subsidize or support agricultural products. I want to proceed very quickly because I know time is not on our side. Honorable Nderito has talked about it. If you are doing all this, one would expect you, then you're taxing the poor like this, that you tax then everybody. But those who are able to afford helicopters, and we are not very many in this country, that one you help by reducing or removing them or exempting them from paying VAT. Let me go to excise duty. Mobile money transfer. We are aware and we know that most Kenyans, especially small traders, the most used mode of transacting is mobile money transfer. I am sure almost all of us here have sent money this morning. Why is Kenya Kwanza government increasing excise duty on mobile money transfer from 12% to 15%, but reducing bank transfer charges or excise duty on bank transfer? What is the rationale? Where is the priority? Who do we think about? Who do we consider? Is it the common person or the elite? The beauty supplies, I think the Prime Minister has exhausted that. I don't want to go to that. But we all know what that means. On imported cement, the issue we have, fine, you can protect. There is excise duty of 10%. You can protect the local economy. But there should be harmony in government policies. If you have set in providing houses, it is imagined that the construction of houses is going to be on upward rise. Therefore, you must make raw materials cheap. This is not the time to interfere with duty on cement, because you are going to make cost of construction more expensive. Why don't we start? Then we see our local demand. If the local demand is not so high that we don't need to import cement, then we can go ahead. This is not the end. This is not the last finance bill. Every year we will have finance bills until Jesus comes. This country will have, as long as it exists as a country, we will have finance bill. Let me quickly, I don't want to go to others. I think we have given you, unless there are more questions. I wanted just to talk about two more things. Something that Prime Minister has touched on. You know, as we were very busy, they call it noise, with this noise around finance bill, they have cheekily introduced another small bill here, an amendment to PFM Act. And what they are doing, and I want to agree with the Prime Minister, you know, first, they are now changing the system of setting the debt ceilings from the absolute number, which is 10 trillion now, to what we may call pegging it on GDP. And they are saying 55% of GDP. That is the proposal. But they already know presently that already our debt stock is at 60% of GDP. And they know it will not make sense, because You are putting it at 55, it's already at 60. So they have come up with an amendment. And this is Public Finance Management Amendment Bill 2023. This is the amendment, and I want to read it. They say Section 50 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting the words "a limit" and substituting therefore the word "set threshold." So they are replacing limit with threshold. That I would leave to lawyers like His Excellency Kalonzo Musyoka to interpret the difference between limit and threshold. To me, probably it is the same. But then, the worst bit is by inciting the following proviso at the end of the sentence. That, and listen to that, provided that if at any time the Cabinet Secretary is unable to maintain the public debt threshold as required under this subsection, or the regulation made thereunder, the Cabinet Secretary shall submit a written report to Parliament explaining the cause of the breach on the threshold and provide a time bound for a remedial plan. How do you explain breach of law? How do you explain breach of law? And it is saying that the Cabinet Secretary will only submit a report. He's not even seeking approval of the National Assembly. I don't know whether there is any democracy in the world where debt ceiling is set by executive alone. So these guys are running away from accountability. They want to I think they just want to destroy the economy of this country. Otherwise, they would not bring such amendment to the floor of the House. Otherwise, Chairman, thank you so much.
Well done. Two other big items. DG Karo Karogu on the housing levy, the tax tribunal, and my colleague and I will speak about the general impacts. Two things to keep in mind about this cheeky amendment to the PFM. Look, there are some things that are presented that are a mirage. One of them is this idea that, debt to GDP and taxation to GDP. We know that some of our external friends say that we should move tax to GDP from 17% to 22%. It's a mirage because you are not taking into account the composition of the GDP. So it's an okay idea to give you a general reference, but you cannot be dogmatic about it. If GDP is in large measure from public expenditure, then you cannot insist on that ratio going up to 22%. And we should encourage everybody to reflect a bit more and not just to parrot what is being said by external forces. The same point about this debt being a percentage of GDP as opposed to an absolute ceiling. The difficulty with it is that because the GDP is growing in large measure because of public expenditure, you are presuming like you can either tax that public expenditure and you cannot. So, and when you analyze it, we hope that you, for the state, explain to Kenyans the meanings of these things so that our colleagues stop taking Kenyans for a ride. Honorable Karo Karogu.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will head on to an issue that has been canvassed. Just last night, out of 4 hours, I think we spoke about the housing levy for a good 2 hours, 13 minutes, and I was counting. It has been reported, misreported, and I think we are not addressing what is the key issue. And I do not think Ruto also knows what the key problem is with this. What we think is happening around the housing levy is that Ruto has friends somewhere. He has assured them you will be investors and you'll have tenders. and you will come and provide us with sockets and wires. And so the deal is done, and now they're doing the backward cleaning. Because essentially, if you ask yourself with the housing levy, what problem are we curing? Are we curing the problem of unemployment? Are we curing the problem of housing? Or is it a problem of income, like most of us, those of us in the finance and economics field believe? What is the point of building somebody a house and that person cannot feed themselves? Even if, and we argue, even if these people are built for houses, they will live in the streets with sufurias in their heads like us in Jubilee and bakulis in their hands, because they will not have food. So where are your priorities? That is what we want to ask Mr. Ruto. And we want to say, matters housing levy, I think I want to conclude it in this way. Kenyans have a serious trust deficit with the Kenya Kwanza government, with Ruto and Gachagua. They are saying, give us your money, we hold it for you for 7 years, we construct houses somewhere, we give to the poor, and then in 7 years, we'll give you back your money. And what Kenyans are asking is, can we trust you even with 100 shillings? So the question around 1%, 3%, I think those are exterior issues. The issue here is Kenyans are saying unequivocally that they cannot trust Ruto and his government with their savings for 7 years, whether or not the houses will be constructed. If we move on to the issue of clinker, Clause 72 is proposing a 10% levy on clinker. Now, those who know anything about the cement industry, clinker composes 60 to 70% of cement today. Most of it is imported. Why? Because it's only 2 or 3 of our cement factories who have grinders to grind a stone that is called pulhamite, that then creates clinker. Now, the question here is how Ruto is proposing to cure the issue of cost of contraction is upside down. Because if you raise importation taxes on cement and on clinker, then what he is trying to tell us is that he's trying to give impetus to the local producers of cement so that they can produce cheaper cement. But the truth is, this is a very expensive country to produce anything, whether you're producing a sweet, that sweet called patco, or a bag of cement. Our cost of production, which is majorly anchored on our cost of energy, is unbelievable. We are the most uncompetitive country in East African region. If you are a manufacturer today, you better go off going to settle up in Rwanda and Tanzania than coming to Kenya. And the issue of energy is easy, and we want to say this to Ruto, and we can give him ideas if our captain allowed us, but we are not here to consult for government. We are not paid by Ruto to consult for him. But this, if you read our manifesto, we had brought up the issue of grid losses in this country. This country is losing 23% of its power on grid losses. Now, let me put that in perspective. 23%, so it's about 0.25% of the power that is produced in Kenya today is lost between production, reticulation, and the end-use customer. In the Azimio manifesto, we had proposed to bring the grid losses down from 23% to 10%. Let me put that further into perspective. Every 1% drop on grid losses is 1.2 billion Kenya shillings. Every 1% drop on grid losses is 1.2 billion shillings saved that can be transferred to the end user. So it doesn't matter how much you raise the cost of you raise the cost of imports. What the government should be doing is ensure that producing locally is competitive, that bag of cement can be produced locally at a cheaper price to match the global and the East African market prices. But this obnoxious government is doing the exact opposite. The same is happening to iron rods and steel bars and craft. Let me spend some time on craft. Craft is the paper that unga. I want to be like my colleague, Honorable Mandi. I do not know what Ruto has with unga. Unga has been hit from left, right, and center. Whether it's VAT, whether it's the actual production of the maize plant in terms of fertilizer and inputs, whether it's the milling, that milling is being hit by, the high cost of fuel, whether it's the transportation between the miller and the shop, the transportation costs, I think Baba has said that very clearly. The trucks that are transporting are now going to be paying 60,000 shillings as opposed to 20,000 shillings per ton, which was what was going on. Now, unga, the paper that wraps unga usually is imported. This there's a proposal to impose a 10% duty on the wrapping paper. So who will bear this cost? It is you and I who are the consumers of unga. Once again, we want to ask, what problem do you have with unga, Mr. Ruto? Let's go to leather. The industry of leather in this country has shrunk over time. And this is because a lot of rawhide is smuggled out of this country. In fact, the experts are telling us we are losing 70% of our rawhide to China through some smuggling process out of this country. So what Ruto is proposing in clause 67, in clause 62, is that he will impose an export levy, on rawhide. So what will this then do is that it will increase, the impetus of people exporting, rawhide. So what does it then do to our tanneries? We have 9 tanneries. They are working, I'm told, at about 30%. We will be closing these tanneries, and everybody who works there will be asked to go home. Therefore, job losses. Clause 67 is proposing to increase the import declaration fee. I mean, that has been canvassed. I think it was also in Baba's speech, from 1.5 to 2.5%. My argument about importation is create a more efficient, effective internal structure so that goods are produced cheaply, and you expand your tax base so that you do not have to worry about what is coming in because you're already competitive enough. Let me move to the second last item, which is a tax appeal tribunal. Now, something very interesting here is happening. That today, if you have a tax issue, you have a tax case, you will pay KRA 20% of the disputed amount. So today, I am disputing 100 million shillings. I will pay KRA, before we start anything, before I file my case with High Court, I will pay KRA some 20 million shillings. Now, this 20 million will not be earning interest. It will be put in an account we call escrow. So an escrow account, that money will be sitting there waiting for you to decide whether you won or you lost the case. You all know how long it takes in this country to, and the lawyers, I can see Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka is here, Honorable Mother. Cases take an immensely long time. So this money will be sitting there waiting for the case to be concluded, and you will get back your 20 million shillings 5 years down the line, no interest. That is what Ruto is proposing. Now, once you remove, apart from the fact that it's very unfair, of course, that you have a tax dispute, and over and above that, you're being asked to cough more money, I think from our side, we're saying there is also an issue of evasion of justice. The Constitution is clear. I think the lawyers can guide me. It's Article 48 of the Constitution. And I think I have my Constitution here. If I could just read, because it's important for us to get this bit. It's about access of justice. The state shall ensure access to justice for all persons, and if any fee is required, it shall be reasonable and shall not impede access to justice. So I don't know how reasonable 20% is. If you ask me a reasonable fee, should be in the decimals, in 0.001, 0.002. That is a reasonable fee. But 20%, Mr. Ruto, by no means is not a reasonable fee, as is prescribed by our Constitution. Last but not least, we talk about the Tax Procedure Act, and this one is extremely interesting. Just like we see in the entire bill, we see Ruto safeguarding his friends. So if you are a friend, I think what he has realized is a lot of his friends have issues with taxes. Because in clause 51, he's proposing an amnesty on any interest, penalties, fees for anybody who has a tax dispute as at 31st of December 2022. Apart from the fact that this sets a very, very bad precedence, because then if I'm the president next time, I will just ask my buddies, how many of you have cases? I can offer you amnesty. So it sets a bad precedence. But we read mischief in this particular amnesty, and we know they're all in government, all of them who have issues with KRA, whose factories have been closed. So what he's telling his friends is that I will give you amnesty until 2024. Please go and sort out your issues. I will scrap your fees and your penalties. I thank you very much for the privilege of your attention. Those are my issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. As the Honorable Badi encouraged Honorable members and Kenyans at large, read the provisos, read the proposal, and check what it is proposing to change. Because if you just read the change, you might think it's a benign change, not knowing that it's not a benign change. Like this issue of the import declaration fees, if you don't read the proviso, you will think it's a good thing. Now, the overall change says, let's move IDF fees from 3.5% to 2.5%. And that might sound like a good thing, except if you read the original act, you will find there is a proviso, provided that raw materials for manufacturing should pay 1.5%. So if you remove the proviso, it means that everything, including the raw materials, goes from 1.5% to 2.5%, which then has the effect of making manufacturing more expensive. We would like to allow perhaps 3 questions of a technical nature, because the presentation is not fully finished. The principals will make interventions at a policy level. So if members of the further state have, let's allow no more than 3 technical questions. In answering those questions, our colleague Saitoti Torome will come up to help us and myself to answer the questions, and also give you one broad statement about the overall impact of these taxation policies on this economy. What do you expect is going to happen if these taxation policies go through? What will happen to the economy this financial year? So, by a show of hands, if, again I repeat, if it's a question of a technical nature, that's what we'll answer. Then afterwards, the principals will make interventions, and you can then ask the bigger picture questions. Yes, down the road.
Yeah, Chairman, we are not going to take just from members of the press alone, even other participants. If you have a question, just raise your hand and you'll be able to ask. Any question?
Of a technical nature. As we do so, Saitoti Torome, please come up to make one statement around the impact.
Questions? Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. It would appear we did a fine job in explaining the intricacies. So thank you very much indeed for that. Saitoti Torome, in one sentence, what's going to be the impact of this taxation on the Kenyan economy overall?
I think thank you very much, Governor Muriithi.
Mine is only to state one point. Since this debate of the finance bill started, there has been a lot of emphasis on the cost of living. One thing that I would like to point out is actually the fact that VAT, it is the one that has a direct impact on the cost of living. Why? Because it is an expenditure tax. And because it's an expenditure tax, it makes the final product like petroleum to be expensive, which affects the cost of living. And also, when we put VAT on inputs, it makes the cost of production very high. Deputy Governor Karo has just said about how it will affect our economy. And it is actually true, because God are the days, and you will agree with me, when you used to say that Kenya is a blue-eyed boy where all the foreign investors are attracted in Africa. It is no longer the case. Many African countries have opened up their economy. Tanzania is there, it has got a lot of resources. Rwanda, Uganda, even DRC now is a member of the East African Community, and South Sudan. So when we make the cost of production in our country very expensive, we will not be able to attract foreign investors, and our economy will not grow. And even to mention that, I can see Honorable Oparanya is there. He actually used to be the Minister for Planning and Vision 2030. If we make the cost of production in our country very high, by imposing such kind of taxes that are in this finance bill, we will not be able to realize the dream of Vision 2030, because we will not be competitive. So we have to be very careful. And just as the Right Honorable Prime Minister said when he was making his closing remarks, when a government is confronted with a budgetary deficit, because this bill is actually trying to make sure that we don't have a deficit, there are two ways. You either increase revenue, you borrow from the public through central bank, or you can even lower the budget. So instead of focusing so much on raising taxes or revenue through taxes, why don't we focus even on the way we do budgeting? And I think that one has been explained by Derito Mureithi on how we can actually be able even to remove duplication and many other things, and then we address the issue of governance. I think I am always a person of very few words, and I think that is what I have actually observed. But the most important thing, this bill will make it difficult for us to realize the dream of Vision 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. May I turn it back to Majority Leader to help us with the balance of the presentation. Asante sana.
Can we give a final round of applause to our Economic Council for a wonderful job? They'll be leaving now to join some other crucial meeting happening next door. So we shall be excusing the members of the Economic Council. Yes. But in the meantime, please allow me to invite Her Excellency Martha Karua to come and forward and address us. Karibu sana, Mheshimiwa Martha Karua.
Good morning, everyone. After my boss has spoken, has given such an eloquent address, there is very little for me to say, and also with the remarks that have been made by our team. But I want to say that clearly the finance bill is an indication that the Kenya Kwanza government has waged an economic war against citizens, and especially the vulnerable. You would expect that during these hard times, there would be measures to cushion the vulnerable. You would expect that food items, critical items, you remember that Azimio has been on the forefront of asking for the lowering of cost of living, actually demanding for the lowering of cost of living. This bill is a contempt card on those demands because its net effect will be to push the cost of living upwards, as has been very eloquently explained. Once you raise VAT on fuel, there's a ripple effect on virtually everything. When you tax exempt things that were zero rated, once again, the effect is pushing the prices up of essential items such as medicine, critical medicine. That, with the current status of NHIF, it means the average person will not have access to critical medicine. And in Kenya, we say families are just one sickness away from abject poverty. So when you move critical medicines to exempt, tax exempt, and push their prices up, it means this bill is going to directly cause deaths, suffering and death to many Kenyans. It also means that food will be less accessible. Already, we have a crisis of people not being able to have meals on their table. With the joblessness, with the cost of living being up, Kenyans have been shown by the Kenya Kwanza regime that they are on their own. This is happening in a context where the expenditure, non-essential expenditure for the office of the president, for the office of the deputy president, for the prime cabinet secretary, luxury items, they have pushed the budget up for travel, the example being led by the office of the president. They have pushed the amount for purchase of non-essential items, fuel guzzlers. Cars are not an essential, especially if they're just discarding cars they found that have not lived have not done their time. Just because you have come in, you buy new vehicles at a time our economy is in crisis. They talk of austerity measures on one hand. On the other hand, they are lavishly spending like there is no tomorrow. So just a look at what is happening. If you look at the finance bill as against the budget proposals, because the increase in expenditure is well captured in the budget proposals, it is quite clear that Kenyans are on their own and that this is a cruel and caring regime which does not care at all if Kenyans die of hunger, if children fail to go to school, or if people die because they cannot access medical services. I would urge, especially our Azimio members of parliament, as you debate, let us not be hoodwinked to concentrate only on the issue of the housing fund. This bill has so much poison in it, which needs to be unpackaged to Kenyans, item by item. And here there can be division of labor, because no single person will have enough time, whether in the media or in parliament, to analyze all the sections of the bill, so that we unpackage this as easily as we can to Kenyans, so that the Mamamboga knows and the artisan that their targets of punitive taxes, I'm using the word punitive, when you start charging turnover tax to people whose income is less than 2,000 shillings a day, because they are aiming at people who are earning 1,300 for taxation. That's a person selling mandazi or chapatis on the roadside. This These are very, very punitive measures, and this is something that should be resisted. And if the Kenya Kwanza government goes through with it that they have threatened, Kenyans must get ready to take action, remembering sovereignty is in their hands. And without much ado, I'll call upon my brother, His Excellency, Dr. Kalonzo Musyoka, even to offer greetings. Much has been said. You are not being asked for much, just greetings.
Asante. You done it so well. I didn't want to add anything because our brother Raila put it so well, so eloquently. I think this has been actually a learning experience for a lot of us, and I want to thank our Economic Council team. Now Kenyans know the difference between zero rating and exemption, and that is where the big lie is. And I think that has been unpacked thanks to Honorable Badi and the colleagues. Last Sunday I was in a church somewhere in the river, in Mulolongo, and I spoke about the skepticism at my level with people wanting to rush to court. Everybody is within their rights to rush to court, but we have also heard from our sister Caroline Karugu on the provisions of Article 48. My brother, who is also a very good friend, Wajakoya, will probably agree, and Mother, denying people access to justice as unconstitutional. So some people rushed and said Kalonzo is supporting the finance bill. My media team did a very good job of that disinformation. So you can see the level of panic. People are panicked because they're doing the wrong things. So, as I said, we are ready to go. Our teams are very well. A leader in Parliament is here, a leader in the National Assembly, and the leaders, of course, the matter is not going to the Senate, so it's all National Assembly. So, Wandai and the teams, I'm sure you are equal to the task. You want me to call some other friend? Yeah, I'll probably call my brother, Governor Eria, who has lived through this. But before you come, Eria, it appears to me, over and above all this, taxation, there's also the Kanjus. You know, the county governments are also doing their own taxation. So look at it. That's why I said you cannot develop an economy this way. And those who have been following even the debate on debt ceiling, for me, I find that completely unacceptable. The issue about debt ceiling had to get President Joe Biden leave the G20 or the G7 summit in Hiroshima, in Tokyo, to go back and make peace and argue and agree with the House Speaker of Congress, because America was at the verge of breaching even the debt ceiling thing. So this debt ceiling matter cannot be hidden. It must be brought to the fore so that Kenyans will know you cannot extend the debt ceiling without the full involvement discussion of Parliament. So hiding it under some funny clause that we just been told, I don't know who made that presentation, that the cabinet secretary responsible for finance can just go and lay on the table some information, and then the country then assumes that all is well. So I think in a nutshell, we are in a crisis, and we need to be able to accept that this is a crisis matter. And then, as my brother said, the conclusion was very clear. We give it to the public court. I don't know whether it's you, Kioni or Wanjakoya or Mwangi you had stood. As I said, I had nothing useful to add. That's why I was muttering around. But I hope I've managed to clear some issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think from a broader sense, we need to look at this budget vis-a-vis the commitments which Kenya Kwanza gave to Kenyans, because that's why they were voted into office. Because even as we get into the figures, there are some broad commitments which Kenya Kwanza gave, and they are supposed to be delivered through the finance bill, essentially. To Central Kenya, for example, there was a commitment for guaranteed minimum prices for coffee, for tea, for milk, and for other farm produce. And from an income perspective, because like for example, from our region, our income comes from agriculture. This finance bill must answer the question. Then, after implementing this finance bill, what then will be the guaranteed minimum price of tea? Because it was a commitment. What will be the guaranteed minimum price of coffee? What will be the guaranteed minimum of price of milk, of cotton, of pyrethrum, and of other farm produce? Because that was the main commitment to farmers. So is coffee going to go to 200 as they committed as an output of this finance bill? That is what those people expect, because they might not understand the numbers very clearly and the argument today, but the impact of this to them is what they need to take home. So Kenya Kwanza must tell us, out of this finance bill, then what will be the guaranteed price of coffee to Mount Kenya farmers, of tea, of milk, of rice, because that was their commitment. As we speak, tea attracts about 42 levies, 42 taxes. And when I was a governor, together with the governor of Kericho, we had actually gone to court, and the matter is still in court, trying to challenge the 42 levies against tea as a crop or as a sector. The matter is still in court. So those are the matters which this bill is supposed to be resolving for our farmers. But they're just giving us figures which are actually indicative of the fact that fertilizer is going to go up, the cost of transport is going to go up, packaging costs is going to go up. So when are we going then? How are we then going to get those deliverables? That is very important. They must tell, especially because I'm from Central and I'm not biased, and I'm speaking also for others, then what will be the price of the guaranteed minimum price of coffee to farmers, tea, milk, cotton? That was a commitment. So they can do what they want, but then announce those prices as part of the finance bill. Lastly, this is not the only finance bill. We are going to have other 47 finance bills from every county. And because the model is the same, and the principle is the same, and the alignment is Kenya Kwanza, and this is a philosophy, it means we now expect worse bills from the counties. So how are we going then to marry the county finance bills and this finance bill and then say this is the overall burden to our people? Because this is half of the burden, or partial burden. So someone need to tell us then what will be the overall impact, because this is half the journey. There is another one which is going to come from the devolved system. What will then will be the overall impact to the average Kenyan of this bill? Because the other levies which are being discussed, and they have been encouraged, by the way, to make sure that they raise as much money as possible, because there is no money from Treasury. So as we look at it, we need to then ask what will be the overall impact, and we also need to assess, and our team need to get into the county finance bills so that we know the overall impact of this year's finance budget from both national and county governments. Thank you.
I think, to me, this is another This is a Chakahora budget. We are all candidates for Chakahora. At this late, none of us can be able to add a kilo to our weights, because the cost of living is certainly going to be totally beyond the reach of all Kenyans. And I wanted to say, when we talked about the 4-5 issues as Azimio, the cost of living, this bill deals with the cost of living. So when we were saying that before any talks take place, we needed to address the cost of living, you can see where the vision that our leader had. When you talk about the need to protect multi-party democracy, to ensure that parties within Azimio are not swallowed or collapsed, it's because if they are collapsed, then there will not be this voice on behalf of Kenyans. The voice of the voiceless will have been taken away, and they are still at it. And I think it is important that they are told they will not succeed, because in succeeding, they will have killed the voice that speaks on behalf of Kenyans. You now can see them clearly trying to legalize corruption. When you say that you'll be taking to Parliament the minister to go and justify why he breached the law, and you provide that in an act of Parliament, it's a regime that is not keen on fighting corruption at all, at all, at all. In the whole of the presentations that we have had, I didn't hear any attempt to seal the loopholes. And if we sealed the loopholes, I'm sure there will be a lot of money that can come back and be available to Kenyans for the things that they have been complaining about. Our party leader, Azimio party leader, has again read us in talking about the need to look at the IBC. The whole process of arriving at leaders. The leaders we have in Parliament and those who went through the window into State House and other places are now producing this. So if our process of electing people is not checked, it will continue producing people who do not care about the welfare of Kenyans. And that is clear from the kind of bill that has been led to us and the one we have been going through. We've been talked about Vision 2030. Now, and let me also say, when you have in Parliament, Mheshimiwa Wadai, unfortunately, when you have in Parliament 90% or 80% of fellas there, and especially from some regions, were all leagued in, they have no business leading these bills. They will just continue leaguing your lives out of anything useful. And that's what they are doing. Vision 2030, a country, a people without vision. That's what the Bible says. People perish if we move away from this vision. And they have not mentioned the issue of Vision 2030 or even 2063 anywhere. So we are just people galloping in the dark. Haki ya Mungu, tuko kwa shida hapa. And again, as His Excellency has said, the universal health care through the window, it just evaporated. A short while ago, you'd use your people back in the countryside who are happy with NHIF cards. Today, you produce it and you are chased out of the hospital. My brother is a doctor and he was told, don't retain anybody in hospital, even after any, whatever kind of operation, beyond 4 days. If you retain them beyond 4 days, wewe mwenyewe utalipa. So it's a question of whether you want to undertake these operations is crazy. But there is one more thing that I think we need to focus on. And this is what will help us and the Senate. Our Kinara has said it many times, but maybe it has not been, the media has not picked it. The amount of money that is spent by Parliament moving from one country to the other, it's a lot of money. The speakers, for example, and especially in the Senate, they actually exchange suitcases at the airport. He has so many places to go, he has no time, to cover all the trips that have been earmarked for him in a year. If we cannot focus on this also, I think it's something, 41 billion shillings to Parliament compared to the judiciary at 20-something, 22, or something like that, and the housing at 29. There are areas where these characters can focus on and still achieve some of the things they think need to be achieved. Of course, not housing, without taxing the Kenyans. Taxing the merry-go-round, Mama Boga na wale mem. I don't know whether you understand. Mount Kenya is full of those merry-go-rounds. And merry-go-round, chamas, all those table banking. So you introduce table banking so that you can get a mrija kukunywa maziwa ya kina mama jikoni. So this is really taxing people while they are sitting at the fireplace. It's really not something that we need to sit loud and wait. But Baba, as I was coming from Nyandarua the other day, I bought some fruits. And a lady who was selling fruits to me said, "We nimekuona kwa Azimio. This pineapple, I am buying it for you, for Baba. Take it to Baba and tell Baba, you are our only hope." Ukirudi nyuma, wa Kenya watapata shida. Kwa hivyo, Kenyans are looking at what you are doing and the leadership that you are giving to us. Na jana usiku nikawaambiwa, wanagojea tu kuambiwa twende. Pali utasema watu waende, hapo ndio watu wataenda. Wame give up kwa hii watu ambao wako hapa. Asante sana. Thank you so much.
Before I invite the last two speakers, let me introduce some of us who are in the room. We have the Honorable Peter Orero, who is our host MP, the MP for Kibra. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Orero. We have Mr. Yagwik Ramji, the Deputy Party Leader of Roots Party, Makofi Kwake. We have Ambassador Elkana Odembo. I'm sure you all know him. Karibu sana Balozi. We have Sheikh Juma Ngao and his colleague. Very good, Mashe. Thank you very much. Of course, we have in the house our technical team. They have been joined now by Professor Adam Solo, Udurongwen, and the rest of the team. Let me invite Honorable Wajakwe to make yes. I'll be inviting, of course, Honorable Paranya to come in later. He's the chairman of the Azimio National Executive Committee. Thank you.
Baba Raila Molo Odinga, Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka, Mheshimiwa Martha Karua, Mheshimiwa Governor wa Iria, Mheshimiwa Kioni, Mheshimiwa Paranya. I'll be very brief and I will not go to what has been said. I talk differently. When you go to a place, you don't repeat what others have said because they have made a point. Baba has made a point, the rest have made a point. I've looked into this budget. This budget is rotten. I'm not going to comment on it because it doesn't have things that matter. In Kenya today, with Gulalu Galana, which was 1 million acres of land, we had proposed, as Roots Party before, we had proposed that we shall take 200,000 acres of land in Galana Gulalu and grow wheat for export. We'll not be having this issue of manuring, this issue of propositions of taxes up and taxes down. Bang does not need fertilizer. Bang does not need to be nurtured. It only grows for 4 months. But the reason why I'm talking of bank economics is the world has moved away from this miniature kind of budgetary system which are imposed by the World Bank, IMF, or Bretton Woods institutions. I, as a scholar of Bretton Woods institutions, that's law in economics, law and development, if you look at what Walter Rodney wrote, and I'm sure my friend Honorable Kalonzo is very much aware because he's a reader, Walter Rodney wrote of a phraseology that led to his death when he was a Guyanese living in Dar es Salaam at that particular time, of how Europe underdeveloped Africa. So we are talking of hegemony of development and undermining underdevelopment because they are looking at us and saying that Africans have no conscience. We have to develop them. If you look at Professor Yunus of Bangladesh, who is also a scholar renowned for women banking, cooperative women banking, a theme that has been taken over by Bangladesh, which is mixed with Islamic banking, that the World Bank has now borrowed that kind of paradigm, where banking is done from the locality of the women where they are found. And that's a story for another day. We will not be talking on this everyday budget, every day sijui nani amefanya nini. Kama tungepanda bangi for export and for economic development, not for smoking, we will not be having this kind of discussions every day. I speak very harshly because I am one of you. And I am one of you I am also recognized wherever I've been in terms of intellectual scholarly work that we have contributed to Harvard, London School of Economics, whereby the whites use us to develop some conscience. Now look at these theories that we are talking about here. These are the kingdom theories. There are theories that are violating what we call kingdom theories, where they talk of the garbage can and the policies. Now here, what Ruto has done is that he has brought a policy to look for a solution. No, he has brought a solution to look for a policy. Instead of putting solutions together, and then you look for a policy, our system is upside down. And none of our leaders are thinking of this. Go outside the box. Look at those Kenyans in the diaspora. Ask them why they're working there. And Honorable Odemo is here. He was one of the best ambassadors we had when we were in the UK. He used to accommodate what we had. Let's look at what we can borrow from the diaspora. We have the brains outside this country that can come and develop this country. Let's look at the Museveni format, the formula that Museveni has used. None of us wants to talk about the Kenyans in the diaspora. We talk about ourselves. Somebody went to Kangundo High School, Nairobi University, worked in the ministry, went to live in Lavington. What kind of policy do you think this person can make? Thank you very much.
Makofi kwa Mheshimiwa Wajakoya. Allow me now to invite the Honorable Wycliffe Oparanya, who is the chairman of the Azimio National Executive Council, and also the deputy party leader of ODM, to come and make closing remarks, really. And if there will be any questions, general questions, we'll ask the party leader to perhaps feed them. Thank you. Karim.
Thank you very much, Honorable Wandai. I want to apologize that I came in late. I was late, so I decided to sit at the back because I was late, and it was because of other commitments that I had earlier that I could not skip. So I want to apologize. Now, Wajakoya said that my brother, that we planned Bangi for export. I don't know how we will protect people from picking it for smoking, what mechanism we shall have when we plant it so that it is not for smoking. But let me tell you that one of the principles of taxation is simplicity. Simplicity is a key principle of taxation. And simplicity in two ways. One, how you calculate it. It should be understood by the taxpayer that this is how tax will be calculated, and he can even calculate himself or herself and pay voluntarily, because it's very simple. And the second one is how you collect it, because you have to look at the cost of collection versus the tax itself. Because if the collection is very expensive, more than even the tax itself, then that's not a good tax. So if you look at this taxation, they are lowering the threshold for turnover tax. It means there will be so many people in that net. Even Mama Mboka will be in that net. Then how are you going to collect that tax? Will you go around harassing Mama Mboka, collecting it? So that is going to be an issue. But ladies and gentlemen, remember, you are talking about Ruto, and I've said here even before, these are not Ruto's proposal. You know very well who put Ruto in power. These are the people who are telling him that if we have to keep you in power, to continue in power, this is what you should do. And we shall continue supporting you so long as you do what we tell you. That's all. I don't think even Ruto has read this taxation bill. I don't think. It is just being imposed on him. And as you go through it, remember that. Now, the finance, our economic committee was here. There is an issue that I picked up in the finance bill, that they are making a proposal to zero rate VAT on acquisition of going concern. Companies that already exist, that if you come and acquire that company, you will not pay VAT. Who are these people? You know, you acquire a company when you are rich. So if you are a rich man, you are coming to acquire Kenya pipeline. Why should I exempt you from VAT? Zero rate VAT that you are going to pay. It means, and you remember, it means already these people are now targeting these companies to acquire them cheaply. Because how do you attract even investors to come and acquire already the existing company? You attract investors to come and invest in new ventures and not going concern. Because going concern, they are already there. So note that. And I think that should also be picked up. Now, I have a friend of mine who is in Uganda. He's a Ugandan, but he has stayed here in Kenya for a long time. So he sent me a message this morning, and I want to read to you. He's saying, let him pass the finance bill as it is. What is wrong with you people? You have to let him make mistakes. That should be your strategy. If you help him to make good decisions, how will you remove him? You are supposed to make a little noise for record purposes that you opposed it, but don't make it too strong. He will correct the mistake then. What becomes of your talking point? And this is my last shot. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, allow me, before I invite Sheikh Juma Ngao to make the final prayer, to say this, because the media have been asking if at all we are going to come up with any amendments. The answer is that a lot has been said about this finance bill, and the public has overwhelmingly rejected it. And in our view, this bill is flawed beyond redemption. So we are going to reject it in total. We are not going to propose any amendment to it. As Azimio, we have said time and again that there is still time to withdraw this bill and bring it back in a form that is responsive to the plight of the people, in a form that is acceptable. But our plea has fallen on deaf ears so far. So if this bill finds its way to the floor of the House in its current form, we are not going to make any attempt to propose any amendments to it. We shall be moving to reject it in total. And in any case, there has been the argument that if the bill is rejected, what will happen? Nothing will happen. Life will continue. Because as we speak, there is a Finance Act 2022, which is in place. You reject this one, it will continue to work. And therefore, the notion that the matter of this Finance Bill 2023 is a matter of life and death is not true. It is simply a mere bill, which we have said is flawed, is not acceptable, is overburdening Kenyans who are already on their knees, and therefore the only logical thing to do is to withdraw it. And therefore, with those few remarks, let me invite the Sheikh Juma Ngao. Yes, as he comes, I've got an apology, of course, from the Honorable Wamalwa, Honorable Eugene Wamalwa, the leader of the DAP Kenya, who was elsewhere, though he's on his way, but he may come late. Thank you. Karibu Sheikh Juma Ngao.
Assalamu alaikum. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Mheshimiwa Rais wetu wa Azimio Baba Raila Amolo Odinga, naibu wetu Mama Martha, ndugu Kalonzo Musyoka, itifaki yote ikizingatiwa. Nimesikiza kwa makini sana wazungumzaji wote, kila mmoja hutaki amalize kuzungumza. Na mazungumzo haya tumekuja kwa sababu jana sisi kama Baraza Kuu la Ushauri la Waislamu Kenya KEMNAK tulifanya press conference Mombasa, tumeipinga hii bill. Na ni baada ya kushauriana na wenye viti wa kaunti 47, tuliwaambia waulize watu misikitini kila wakiswali kuhusu bili hii. Na majority of the Muslims katika kaunti 47 wakasema ambia chairman hii bili aipinge. Nikapigia mzee simu, mzee Raila, akatupa ruhusa, na jana tulikuwa na press conference Mombasa, na sasa hivi nafikiri iko viral katika mitandao yote. Hii bill niliposikiliza leo nimepata mengi zaidi. Ina somo moja ambalo napenda niwafahamishe. Binadamu wamegawanyika makundi manne, na kuomba usikize kwa makini. Kundi la kwanza kuna watu. Kundi la pili kuna watu wengine. Kundi la tatu kuna wengineo. Na la mwisho akina nani? Watu, watu wengine, wengineo na akina nani. Ukiwataka wote kuwapata hawa, nenda harusini, tuwapata wote hawa. Watu ni wale wenye harusi, familia ya bibi na ya bwana, wale ndio watu. Utengeza kadi wale watu. Yule alikuwa watu wengine. Ukipua kadi wewe ni wale watu, wewe ni mtu mwingine. Kisha ukimwalika bwana Kioni hapa, na mimi niko karibu na sina kadi, atasema shekhe nifuate mimi. Wewe huna kadi, I am your kadi. Wengineo wale. Alafu wakifarusini wale watu, watu wengine na wengineo hukaa kama hivi, high table, kila mtu na sinia lake. Biriani, kuku, kachumbari, mapochopocho, sambusa, zote kila mmoja sinia lake. Manake watu wengine na wengineo. Kisha nje ya geti huanza fujo kule. Huko kwa lumbana, kwa pigwa, mpaka askari ushindwe akarudi kwa mwenye harusi. Mzee kule kuna fujo sana. Mwenye harusi huenda paka pale. Kina nani? Yapo. Nyinyi na nani? Nyinyi na nani nyinyi? Nyinyi na nani nyinyi hapa? Awajua mzee, sisi vijana wa mtaani hapa tunkuja, soga ndiye mbaya. Haya, kaeni sita. Kaeni sita. Watu 6 sinia moja. Haina nyama, haina kachumbari, haina sambusa, haina juice. Hivi ndivyo serikali hii imefanywa. Tumefanywa akina nani na Ruto, na bili hii ikipita tutakuwa akina nani zaidi. Sasa nikirudi katika theology, mimi si wakili. Utawala hauanzi sasa. Kuna watawala kwenye Qur'an na Bible wametajwa wa nguvu. King David alikuwa very powerful. Solomon alikuwa na nguvu nyingi sana, akitawala binadamu, majini, mashetani, wanyama, hata upepo. Akitaka ruka mahali, Suleiman anaweka mkeka, anaomba dua kwa Mwenyezi Mungu, anaruka, akifika anashuka. Alikuwa very powerful. Akaja Firauni. Asa Solomon na David hawakumwasi Mwenyezi Mungu, alitawala vizuri. Firauni akaja akakosa. Akatesa Mayahudi, akaoa watoto wachanga wa Kiyahudi, akafanya uchumi wa Misri mbaya kama huu. Mbingu zikachukua hatua. Lipelekewa Nabii Musa, akaonywa, hakusikia. Akapelekewa Haruni, akaonywa, hakusikia. Mbingu zikachukua hatua kwa utawala huo, akadidimizwa Red Sea. Yeye na jeshi lake. Sijui katiba yasemaje, rais akiwa hivi kama huyu hapa, katiba yasemaje? Mimi si wakili, unajua. Ikiwa Mungu alipofsinywa na Firauni, anachinja watoto wa Kiyahudi, amepandisha tax, maisha ni magumu, ameongea na Musa hasikii, Haruna akamwonya hakusikia, maisha ilipokuwa ngumu, mbingu zichukua hatua. Alidimizwa Red Sea na Mayahudi wakaokolewa, wakaenda Kanani. Katiba yasema nini ikiwa rais wa nchi anaharibu nchi kama hivi? Katiba yasema nini ikiwa rais wa nchi anafanya tuwe akina nani? Manake hii kipita, hutaweza lisha familia yako yote kila siku. Itabidi iwe sahani moja, watu 6 au watu 10. Yani tutakuwa akina nani kila family, Coast, Nairobi, Eastern, tutakuwa ni akina nani? Sahani moja, watu 10, washikeshike, hawakushiba. Kama mtu anafanya taifa linakuwa akina nani, hatui watu, si watu wengine, si wengineo, tunakuwa akina nani? Mtawala akifanya wananchi kuwa akina nani, katiba yasemaje? Ni homework. Mimi wakili. Asalamu alaikum.
We have come to the end of this wonderful session. So unless there's some burning question, very burning question from the media, we shall be calling it a day. Yes? We are okay? No. We are okay, Phil. Asanteni sana. Mwenyezi Mungu awabariki. God bless.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for finding time for this engagement. We encourage you to continue to partake of the tea and the niceties that we have arranged for you. Kindly don't be in a hurry to leave. Asanteni sana.